A humble beginning. Beneath the Indian sun, the sun had barely risen over the rooftops of Chennai, casting warm orange hues over the tiled roofs of modest homes. In one such house lived a boy named Pichai Sundararajan, Sundar to everyone who knew him. It wasn't a large home. In fact, the walls often echoed the sounds of two children arguing over who got the bigger portion of idli at breakfast. But despite the limited space and resources, the house was filled with something far more valuable: love, discipline, and an unshakable sense of purpose. Sundar's father, Raghunatha Pichai, worked as an electrical engineer, not for fame or fortune, but because he believed in building things, literally and metaphorically. He worked for the British conglomerate GEC, bringing parts and blueprints to life with his steady hands. Sundar often sat quietly beside him at night, watching as his father sketched circuits and explained them with passionate enthusiasm. "You see this, Sundar?" he once said, pointing to a transistor. "It may look small, but if you understand it well, you can change the world." Young Sundar didn't fully grasp the weight of those words at the time, but he listened, carefully, always carefully. That was his gift. He could remember conversations, numbers, ideas. His mind was a vault of precision and possibility. And his heart? That was filled with gratitude for every sacrifice his parents made. The family didn't own a car. They didn't have a phone. For years. The refrigerator came much later, but one thing they always had was books, stacked on shelves, hidden in cupboards, sometimes even under Sundar's bed. His mother, a skilled stenographer who gave up her job to raise him, would make sure that he and his brother had everything they needed, even if it meant skipping meals. One day, when Sundar was around 12, his father took him on a long bus ride. Through Chennai's sweltering heat, they ended up in a shop that sold used electronics. "I'm buying you a gift today," his father said, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Something I never had. A rotary phone." Sundar's eyes lit up. That phone would change his life, not because of its function, but because of the conversations it enabled. Sundar became fascinated with how communication worked. The tones, the buttons, the invisible threads connecting people across cities. He began asking questions that few could answer. He didn't know it yet, but that fascination was planting the earliest seeds of what would become his legacy. A mind. Quietly rising. Sundar grew fast, not just in age, but in wisdom. He excelled. At school, often finishing tests ahead of time and helping classmates long after the bell rang. His teachers whispered about him in the corridors. "This one is different," said one of them. "He's not chasing marks. He's chasing understanding." At IIT Madras, Sundar would sit on the floor and read about material science, semiconductor physics, and the strange, future-shaped promise of the internet. Then came the day he was accepted into the Indian Institute of Technology in Kharagpur. It was a moment of pride, but it was also a moment of fear. "Can we afford to send him there?" his mother asked one night, her voice barely above a whisper. His father didn't answer immediately. He just nodded, then quietly walked into his room. The next morning, he took out a loan. A big one. "I never got the chance to fly in an airplane," his father said as he handed Sundar the ticket. "But I hope your mind flies higher than anything I can imagine." That night, Sundar sat on the rooftop staring at the stars. He didn't know how he would pay back the kindness, but he swore to himself, "One day I'll do something that makes him proud. I'll make it all worth it. From dreams to destiny." IIT Kharagpur, Sundar thrived. Professors pushed him, peers admired him, but it wasn't enough. He wanted more. So he applied to Stanford. The acceptance letter arrived on a damp day. Rain splashed against the window as Sundar stood motionless, staring at the seal of Stanford University. His mother cried with pride. But again the question returned, "Can we afford this?" Sundar's father mortgaged their home. "Do it," he said. "I don't care what we lose. You're our future now." Years later, Sundar would still tear up when he talked about that sacrifice. Because it wasn't just money, it was faith. Blind, fearless faith in a boy who had never even seen Silicon Valley. The flight Sundar's first time on a plane was a 16-hour journey filled with excitement and anxiety. He carried just 2 bags, a few clothes, a calculator, and his father's old circuit diagrams. When he landed in California, everything felt alien. The streets, the language, the sky itself. But Sundar wasn't afraid. He was focused. He spent his nights in libraries and his days immersed in research. He ate 1 meal a day to save money. He walked miles instead of taking buses. Yet he never missed a single class. And then came the phone call, a father's whisper. Across continents, it was late one night in Palo Alto. Sundar's phone rang. It was his father. Sundar, I've been diagnosed with something. Nothing too serious. But I'm scared. Sundar's hand froze. The man who had never shown weakness, who had taken loans, made sacrifices, and taught him everything, sounded fragile. I'm not asking for anything, his father added. I just wanted to hear your voice, that's all. That was the moment Sundar changed. It wasn't just about becoming successful anymore, it was about returning everything. With interest, with heart, with gratitude multiplied 1,000-fold. From Silicon Valley to silent promises, what he did next will leave you in tears. The late-night call from Chennai played on repeat in Sundar's mind. His father's voice, usually firm like iron wires, holding up a bridge, had trembled like a cracked bell. There was no request for help, no plea. Just a statement. I just wanted to hear your voice. But sometimes it's what isn't said that shakes you more. Sundar sat on the edge of his bed in his tiny student apartment in Palo Alto. A bare mattress, a metal shelf of used textbooks, a single photo of his parents on the wall. That was it. That was his world. He didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. For the first time, the distance between ambition and family felt like an abyss. The unseen. Battle Begins classes continued at Stanford. Sundar showed up. He took notes, he participated. But his heart, it was thousands of miles away, hovering like a worried spirit in that small home in Chennai. Every beep from his email or vibration from his outdated phone made his pulse quicken. Was it news from home? Was it serious? But still, he said nothing. To his professors, nothing to his peers, because Sundar was not raised to make excuses. He was raised to endure, and endure he did. While his classmates used internships to network with big-name tech firms, Sundar worked part-time jobs on campus. He cleaned labs, organized storerooms, helped undergrads with coding exercises for a few extra dollars. Every cent he earned was carefully folded and set aside, for future flights, for doctor bills, for something. But something strange was happening too. An idea was growing. During one of his late-night research sessions, Sundar came across a paper on user interfaces and real-time feedback loops in web browsers. What if people didn't need to remember websites? What if the technology anticipated what they needed? The idea stuck with him like a whisper that refused to fade. But Sundar put it aside. Right now, his priority was family, not changing the world. He quietly finished his Stanford degree, then moved on to Wharton to pursue an MBA, a decision driven not by prestige, but by necessity. He believed business knowledge would help him create scalable solutions for people like his parents, who gave everything, yet asked for nothing. Meanwhile, his father was quietly losing weight. The illness wasn't terminal, but it was persistent, expensive, humbling. One day his mother told him softly over the phone, "Your father doesn't want to worry you, but he hasn't left the bed in 3 days." The flight back, that was it. Sundar packed his bag that night, not because he had spare money, not because he had time, but because a promise made on a rooftop years ago had just called in its debt. One day I'll make it all worth it. He bought a last-minute ticket. Most of his savings vanished in a single click. But the moment the wheels of that plane lifted off the runway, Sundar felt something lift from his heart too. When he landed, in Chennai, the air hit him like a wave of memory. Dusty roads, shouting vendors, warm rain that smelled like clay, and then, the sight that stopped his breath. His father, frailer than he remembered, sitting on the same chair where Sundar once learned to solder his first circuit. They didn't say much that evening. They didn't need to. His father simply looked at him and said, "You came," and Sundar replied, "I promised." Silent healing, loud hope. Over the next 2 weeks, Sundar became nurse, son, cook, and confidant. He took his father to medical checkups, sat through long, silent afternoons beside him, helped, adjust his medicines, took detailed notes, asked tough questions to the doctors, but most importantly, he gave his father time. Not money, not emails. Time. One evening, as they sat watching the news on an old CRT television, his father turned to him and said something that stayed with him for the rest of his life. "You've gone so far, Sundar. Don't let success make you forget your way home." Sundar didn't reply. He just nodded, holding back the emotions that swelled in his chest. A seed planted in silence. That trip back to India shifted something in him permanently. When he returned to the US, it was with new fire. He wasn't just chasing a future, he was building one. One where technology didn't just entertain, it empowered. One where the boy who didn't have a phone could one day lead the creation of a phone that knew your needs before you could. He applied to Google. And during the interview, when asked why he wanted to join the company, he didn't talk about innovation or money or prestige. He simply said, "Because information is power, and I want every child who grew up like me to have that power at their fingertips." The room went silent. He got the job, and the world would never be the same. The day he almost gave up, until a voice from home changed everything. It had been only a few months since Sundar Pichai had walked through the tall glass doors of Google headquarters. He remembered the moment well, not because he felt like he belonged, but because he didn't. The place was a maze of whiteboards, caffeinated geniuses, startup jargon, and ideas that shot through the air like sparks. The walls were colorful, the snacks were free, the energy was high. But Sundar? He was quiet, observing, listening, absorbing. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room. He wasn't the flashiest resume in the stack. But deep inside him was something no CV could list: endurance. Thrown into the fire, Google hired Sundar into the product management team. His first task? Help improve the toolbar. Yes, the toolbar, not Gmail, not search, not Chrome. Just a thin strip of clickable tools most users ignored. Other new hires celebrated roles on flashy projects. Sundar got the underdog job. Still, he rolled up his sleeves and dove in. He worked nights. He documented every interaction. He reviewed user behavior data until his eyes blurred. He fixed bugs others dismissed. He took notes at meetings nobody cared about. He believed that small things mattered, because sometimes it's the quiet parts of a machine that hold the whole thing together. But that belief was tested quickly. Doubt creeps. And the work was slow. The results were underwhelming. Senior developers often dismissed his ideas. Some barely acknowledged him in brainstorming sessions. One even joked, "You're not loud enough for Silicon Valley. Maybe try accounting." And still, Sundar stayed. Polite, still curious, still learning. But one night, after a particularly frustrating team meeting, he sat alone in the empty Google cafeteria. It was past 11 p.m. The room buzzed with the hum of vending machines and distant hallway lights. He stared at his laptop, watching a prototype crash for the 5th time that evening. His hands trembled, not with anger, but with fatigue. "Maybe I'm not built for this," he whispered to himself. For the first time in years, the boy who had left home with so much hope felt defeated. The call that changed everything out. Of instinct, he pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked from a drop days earlier. He scrolled aimlessly. Then, almost subconsciously, he called home. It was mid-morning in Chennai. His mother answered, and within seconds handed the phone to his father. "Hello, Sundar," came the warm, slightly hoarse voice. "How's the new job?" Sundar hesitated. "It's hard, Appa. Harder than I expected. I'm trying, but maybe I'm not good enough." There was a long pause on the line. Then came the words that would remain etched in his heart forever. "Sundar, I once walked 5 miles just to get your first school uniform stitched. You were 5, it rained all day, and the tailor said to come back later. But I waited, because I knew you were worth it. You just don't see it yet." Sundar didn't respond. He couldn't. The lump in his throat choked him. Then came one last sentence. "You don't have to prove the world wrong. Just remember who raised you." Back into the storm. The next morning, Sundar walked into the office not with a new idea, but with a new resolve. He didn't fight harder. He listened better. He didn't argue louder. He spoke smarter. Within weeks, small changes he made to the toolbar began increasing user engagement. Google engineers started noticing his patterns. Quietly, Sundar was building a reputation. If Sundar is on the team, the project runs smoother. The Chrome vision. Then came the browser wars. Internet. Explorer dominated. Firefox was rising. Google didn't even have its own browser. And then quietly in the background, Sundar pitched something bold. Let's build our own browser. Fast, clean, simple. Executives were skeptical. Why reinvent the wheel? Too expensive. No user loyalty. But Sundar had data. He had vision. And more than anything, he had conviction born from silence. The kind of conviction built in the fires of doubt and forged by words spoken under the Indian sun. After months of persuasion and a quiet tug of war, he got the green light. Google Chrome was born. Failure looms. Then history is made. Early internal tests failed. Teams fought over design. Critics laughed. But Sundar kept going. He visited every team personally, asked questions, took feedback, made people feel heard. Not once did he seek personal credit. And then, launch day. Millions of downloads, rave reviews, exploding user numbers. In just 2 years, Chrome overtook Firefox. In 5 years, it dethroned Internet Explorer. Today, it's the most used browser in the world. When Sundar's father read the headline in the Hindu newspaper, "Indian engineer leads Google's Chrome revolution," he didn't say a word. He just folded the paper, smiled at Sundar's mother, and said, "Told you, he was always worth it." What Sundar did in secret for his father will leave you in tears. Success had finally touched Sundar Pichai's shoulders. But instead of basking in it, he carried it like a quiet responsibility. No flashy interviews, no media tours. While the tech world buzzed about Google Chrome's rapid rise, Sundar remained the same man who once memorized every number on a rotary phone, not for show, but for love. But amidst the headlines and meetings, one thing weighed on him. His father's condition was quietly worsening. He never said much. His voice on the phone always had a smile stitched into it. But mothers speak the truth. And during a hushed call, Sundar's mother finally said it. "Sundar. His walking has slowed. He pretends it's nothing, but the stairs, they exhaust him." Sundar said nothing. But that night he opened his laptop and began planning something no one else knew about. Operation Home of Dignity. He remembered everything about the house he grew up in. The way the fan buzzed just a bit off-center, the broken kitchen tile that had never been replaced, the narrow staircase that now felt like a mountain to his father. He remembered the wires running from room to room because they had no built-in outlets back then. And he remembered the promise he had made, not just to succeed, but to return everything. So quietly, very quietly, Sundar began designing something his parents never asked for, a new home, not a mansion, not a luxury palace, but a home where dignity walked freely, where his father wouldn't need to struggle with stairs, where his mother wouldn't have to balance pots on broken shelves. A home with light, with airflow, with comfort. He hired an architect. Secretly, he requested the old house to be replicated, only updated with ramps, a central courtyard, modern appliances, and a room for Sundar's father that faced east, because he knew his father liked morning sunlight. The money came from Sundar's personal account, not Google, not media sponsors. No one was told, not even his closest friends. He called the project Return. A trip home, with a twist. 2 months later, Sundar booked a flight to Chennai. His parents assumed he was just visiting. His father, now slightly thinner and walking with a cane, waited at the airport in a white shirt, still ironed neatly as he always did for special occasions. "He's the same Sundar," his father told the relatives proudly. "Only now he has a laptop." But when Sundar got into the car with them, he didn't direct the driver toward their home. "Where are we going?" his father asked. Sundar smiled. "You'll see." They drove for about 20 minutes, and then they stopped outside a new gate. Behind it stood a clean, simple 2-story house, soft white paint, wide glass windows, and a wraparound veranda filled with potted plants. Sundar stepped out first and walked around to open the door for his father. "Come, this is yours now." Tears on the threshold. His father was speechless. For a man who had spent decades reading blueprints and designing electrical layouts for others, he never imagined his own son would someday hand him a dream already built. "You built this." "For me?" he whispered. "For both of you," Sundar replied softly. "You gave up comfort so I could chase a future. It's time that future gave you something back." They walked through the house together. His mother admired the modular kitchen, running her fingers across the smooth counters with disbelief. She laughed when she saw the automatic lights. She gasped when she found the small meditation corner Sundar had added just for her. His father moved slowly, stopping to rest on a sleek wooden bench in the front yard. "There's no staircase," he said, noticing. "Because you don't need to climb anymore," Sundar replied. "And the sun? It hits my bed in the morning." "Because I remembered." His father said nothing, just looked up, eyes red but glowing, the true definition of success. That night, they all sat on the porch. The neighborhood was quiet. Crickets chirped. A soft breeze carried the scent of jasmine, and then his father, without looking at anyone, said, "Sundar, people will talk about your success for years. Chrome, Google, maybe more to come. But this home is the only thing I needed to feel successful as a father." Sundar didn't reply. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something old, a folded piece of yellow paper. It was one of his father's original electrical diagrams, from when he used to sit by candlelight, sketching circuits. "I kept this all these years," Sundar said, "to remind me that before I built anything, you built me." His father, overwhelmed, reached out and gripped his son's hand, something he hadn't done in decades. No more words were needed. The world keeps watching, but he looks homeward after returning to the U.S. Sundar went back to work. But something inside him had changed, not in ambition but in purpose. From then on, every product he worked on, every decision he made, was run through one silent filter. Would this help a father like mine? Would this make life easier for a mother like mine? Because true innovation wasn't just in features, it was in service. Years later, when journalists asked him, "What's your proudest moment?" he didn't say Chrome, or Android, or even becoming CEO. He said, "Giving my father a home where he could rest with dignity. That moment, that was everything." He finally became CEO, but no one knew what he did right after the announcement. The tech world erupted in headlines. Sundar Pichai named new CEO of Google. From Chennai to Silicon Valley, the humble engineer now heads the world's most powerful tech giant. Cameras clicked, reporters rushed, news tickers rolled across global television screens. The world saw the moment as historic, and rightly so. A boy from a modest two-room home in India had now become the captain of a digital empire shaping billions of lives. But amidst all the attention, cheers, and corporate backpatting, Sundar Pichai disappeared. The world didn't know. But he wasn't, at the after-party. He wasn't taking selfies with executives. He wasn't calling investors or preparing press quotes. Instead, he quietly made a call to a number that was never stored in his contact list but memorized forever, the number of home. A call that echoed through time. It was 2:17 a.m. in Chennai. The old landline rang. Sundar's father, now much older, answered after the fourth ring. Hello? There was a pause, and then came the voice he knew too well. Appa. I got the job. There was silence. A long one. Then finally, with a small chuckle that carried both disbelief and pride, his father whispered, I knew it. Even before you did. The journey that wasn't in the resume. The next day, while the internet buzzed with tweets and think pieces, Sundar took a different kind of trip. He visited an old public school in Mountain View, the kind with peeling paint and underfunded aisle programs. He didn't alert press. He didn't wear a Google tag. He just sat down with a group of 12-year-olds in a classroom, knee to knee, eye to eye. What do you want to build? He asked them. A small girl raised her hand. A robot that feeds. My grandma. Another boy said, an app that stops my dad from yelling when he drives. Sundar smiled. Those ideas matter. Never think small. Not ever. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't for PR. It was a ritual he had kept up for years, visiting a random school once every few months, listening to kids who reminded him of the boy who once repaired his family fan with duct tape and a hope. But this visit was different. This time, he was CEO. And still, he wore sneakers. Still, he listened more than he spoke. A quiet gesture. No one expected. Later that week, while every major business network was chasing an interview with the new CEO, Sundar boarded a plane to Chennai. Again, without fanfare. This time he brought something more symbolic than expensive. A single, neatly folded document. When he stepped into his childhood home, now modern yet still warmed by the smell of sambar from the kitchen, his parents sat waiting in the courtyard. He greeted them. No cameras, no announcement. Then he handed his father the document. What's this? His father asked. My first official act as CEO. He opened it slowly. Inside was a notarized trust fund, personally funded by Sundar, earmarked for underprivileged Indian engineering students whose families couldn't afford education or health care. The trust bore his father's name, the Raghunatha Pichai Foundation, for aspirants of engineering and hope. Tears fell freely now. His father tried to speak but couldn't. Sundar leaned in. You gave up everything so I could dream. Now your name will live in the dreams of thousands more. Why no one heard about it? Google's PR department offered to issue a press release about the foundation. Sundar declined. If a tree grows in the forest and gives shade, does it need a billboard? He asked gently. To him, success wasn't about who knew what he had done. It was about who felt the results without ever knowing his name. So he walked back into the shadows of routine. Running Google, attending meetings, shaping global strategy. But in between the lines of data and the echoes of earnings calls, he continued to live by one rule. Always build quietly, and always remember who you're building for. A son's final tribute on his last day in Chennai before flying back. Sundar sat beside his father in the garden. His father stared into the sky, tired but at peace. People are calling me the father of the Google CEO, he said with a faint smile. Sundar replied, I'm just proud I get to be your son. They sat in silence, 2 generations bridged not by wealth, but by sacrifice and grace. And then, as the sun began to set, Sundar reached into his wallet and pulled out an old photo. It was him, barely 5 years old, standing next to his father. Both barefoot beside their old house, he handed it over. This picture kept me going when things were tough. Now it's yours again." The world praised him, but his father's final words were the only reward he ever wanted. Sundar Pichai's name had become global. He wasn't just the CEO of Google anymore. He was the quiet genius behind Android's rise, the diplomat who navigated international data tensions, the leader who pushed AI into everyday homes, yet maintained his humility like a worn but cherished medal. He was praised in newspapers, honored at summits, and even recognized by presidents and prime ministers. But none of those headlines held his attention for long, because even as the world called him a visionary, Sundar remained one thing, above all else, his father's son. A familiar silence at home. The calls from Chennai began coming less frequently. His mother assured him everything was fine. His father, though weaker now, still insisted on walking around the house in the early mornings. He still insisted on fixing small things, leaky taps, misaligned cabinet doors, saying, "These hands can still work. Let them." But Sundar, ever observant, noticed the pauses in his father's speech had grown longer. One night, after another 18-hour day of managing global teams and navigating complex ethical tech dilemmas, Sundar finally paused long enough to listen to what his silence had been saying for weeks. He booked a flight to Chennai, not as a CEO, not as a tech giant, but as a son answering life's final call. A farewell, like no other. When he arrived, the house smelled of ginger tea and jasmine, the same scent that had carried him through childhood. His mother hugged him with trembling hands. His father was lying on the same bed Sundar had designed to face the rising sun. He looked small now. His cheeks had hollowed, but his eyes, those eyes still burned with quiet fire. "Sundar," he whispered. "So, the world's proud of you now?" Sundar pulled a chair closer, smiling through wet eyes. "Appa, I've been proud of you since I was a boy. The world is just catching up." They laughed, softly. Later that evening, as the sky turned from orange to indigo, they sat together one last time. His father asked one final question. "Do you remember the time I walked in the rain to get your first uniform?" Sundar nodded, voice cracking. "I think of it every time I walk into a boardroom." Then came the words Sundar would remember for the rest of his life, words not said with grandeur but with breath almost gone. "You did it, Sundar. You made it worth it." His father closed his eyes with a small, satisfied smile. He passed away that night. What Sundar did next shocked everyone. The funeral was simple, just the way his father would have wanted it. No media, no long eulogies. Just family, old friends, and neighbors who remembered the man who once fixed their radios for free. But what happened weeks later left people speechless. Sundar held a private ceremony, not at Google, not at an auditorium, but at a small government school in Tamil Nadu, where his father once donated a projector 10 years ago, anonymously. There, before a crowd of students who had never met his father but benefited from his generosity, Sundar stood in front of a small bronze plaque and unveiled it with his own hands. It read, "To the quiet builders for those who sacrifice without ever asking to be seen. Dedicated to Sundar Pichai, father, mentor, dreamer." No news outlets were invited. The only photograph taken was by a local teacher on an old phone. Sundar later printed it and framed it in his office. Not his degrees, not his patents, not the Forbes cover. Just that photo. The final reward years passed. Sundar led Google through revolutions in AI, green technology, digital access, and space communications. But he remained the same. Still soft-spoken, still carrying a lunchbox to work, still believing in quiet dignity over loud applause. During one international interview, a journalist asked, "You've been called the most influential tech leader alive. What's been your biggest reward?" Sundar leaned back, eyes distant but peaceful. "When my father said, 'You made it worth it.' That was the only reward I ever truly needed. Legacy beyond Silicon today. Students in rural India use free Chrome-based devices donated by the foundation Sundar built in secret. In Chennai, an annual scholarship called the Quiet Engineer Award is given to a student who shows brilliance with humility, just like Sundar Pichai once did. And at Google HQ, there's a hidden quote engraved in one of the garden stones, planted by Sundar himself. It reads, "Build for others like your parents built for you." Final note to the viewer. Dear listener, this isn't just a story about Sundar Pichai. It's a story about gratitude, about how the foundation of our greatest achievements often lies in silent sacrifices we never saw coming. Your parent, your teacher, your friend. Someone in your life has walked in the rain for you without asking for credit. Maybe it's time to let them know it was worth it.